in the shadows of forsaken locals, where the boundary between realms becomes delicate, macabre stories murmur their ominous secrets. Ready yourself for a voyage into the deepest abysses of the human spirit, where Gothic terrors hold sway. Welcome to Macabre Mondays.
Chapter 1: The Untimely Demise. The storm raged on, its relentless fury battering the once grand Elliot Manor. Sheets of rain lashed against the crumbling facade, as if the very heavens wept for the tragedy that had befallen this once proud edifice. Within its decaying walls, Thomas Elliot paced the shadowed halls, his footsteps echoing like the mournful tolling of a bell. Grief had etched deep lines upon his weathered face, his eyes hollow and haunted. The light that had once danced within them had been extinguished, snuffed out like a candle in the wind. Thomas had been a man of wealth and influence, but now he was but a specter, a shadow of his former self, consumed by the anguish of his loss. It had been but a fortnight since Isabelle, his beloved wife, had been taken from him. The memory of her untimely demise still burned like a brand upon his soul, searing him with a pain that refused to ebb. He had loved her with every fiber of his being, their bond forged in the crucible of passion and devotion. Together, they had built a life, a sanctuary amidst the cold, indifferent world. And now, that sanctuary lay in ruins, the once vibrant manor reduced to a crumbling husk, a reflection of Thomas's own shattered heart. The grand foyer, once adorned with gleaming marble and gilded accents, now stood in disrepair, the floor littered with fallen plaster and the air thick with the scent of decay. Shadows clung to the corners, as if the very darkness sought to swallow what little light remained. Thomas paused, his gaze drawn to a faded portrait that hung upon the wall, a testament to the life he had once shared with Isabelle. In it, her radiant smile seemed to mock him, a cruel reminder of the happiness that had been so cruelly snatched away. With trembling fingers, he reached out, tracing the contours of her face, as if by doing so, he could somehow bring her back to him. But Isabelle was gone, her delicate form now nothing more than a lifeless husk, interred within the cold embrace of the earth. Thomas had wept until his tears had run dry, his heart shattered beyond repair. In the depths of his anguish, he had cursed the heavens, railing against the cruel twist of fate that had robbed him of his beloved. Now, as he stood amidst the ruins of his once proud domain, Thomas felt the weight of his grief pressing down upon him, threatening to crush the very last vestiges of his sanity. The manor, once a symbol of his success and the embodiment of his dreams, had become a tomb, a constant reminder of all that he had lost. The wind howled through the broken windows, its mournful cries echoing the turmoil that raged within Thomas's soul. He sank to his knees, his fingers clawing at the dusty floorboards, as if seeking some anchor to this world, some solace from the torment that consumed him. "Isabelle," he whispered, his voice cracking with anguish. "My love, my life. How can I go on without you?" The shadows seemed to press in around him, as if the very manor itself sought to swallow him whole. Thomas felt the last vestiges of his composure slipping away, his grip on reality growing ever more tenuous. In the depths of his despair, he clung to the fading memory of Isabelle's embrace, her gentle touch and soothing words the only balm for the ache that consumed him. But even that comfort was beyond his reach, for Isabelle was gone, her spirit torn from this world, leaving Thomas adrift in a sea of grief and longing. The manor, once a beacon of his prosperity, had become a tomb, a monument to the love he had lost in the life that had been so cruelly cut short. As the storm raged on, Thomas Elliot remained, a solitary figure amidst the decay, his soul consumed by the anguish of his untimely loss. The manor, once a testament to his success, had become a prison of his own making, a constant reminder of the happiness he had once known and the love he could never reclaim. Chapter 2: Spectral Visitations. The howling wind rattled the panes of the manor's crumbling windows, as if the very elements conspired to torment Thomas Elliot's shattered soul. He paced the shadowed halls, his footsteps echoing like the mournful tolling of a bell, a constant reminder of the ache that consumed him. Grief had etched deep lines upon his weathered face, his eyes hollow and haunted, the light that once danced within them extinguished. The grand foyer, once adorned with gleaming marble and gilded accents, now stood in disrepair, the floor littered with debris and the once resplendent chandelier casting a dim, flickering glow that only served to accentuate the manor's decay. Thomas paused, his gaze drawn to the portrait that hung above the fireplace, its gilded frame tarnished and the canvas itself cracked and faded. It was a painting of Isabelle, his beloved wife, her radiant smile and vibrant eyes a stark contrast to the gloom that now permeated every corner of the once grand estate. A shudder ran down his spine as he felt a sudden chill, as if the very air had grown colder around him. He whirled, his heart pounding, but saw nothing save for the shadows that seemed to lengthen and writhe, as if imbued with a malevolent life of their own. "Isabelle," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Is that you?" The silence that followed was deafening, save for the mournful howl of the wind and the faint creaking of the old manor's bones. Thomas stood, frozen, his gaze darting about the dimly lit foyer, searching for any sign of his beloved's ghostly form. Time seemed to slow to a crawl as he waited, his breath caught in his throat. And then, a faint whisper, barely audible, caressed his ear, sending a shiver down his spine. "Thomas." He whirled again, his heart racing. But the foyer remained empty, save for the dancing shadows. Yet, he could have sworn he caught a glimpse of a translucent figure, a fleeting apparition that vanished as quickly as it had appeared. Doubt and fear began to gnaw at him, his mind racing with 1,000 questions. Was he truly hearing Isabelle's voice, or was his grief-stricken mind playing cruel tricks upon him? He pressed a trembling hand to his forehead, feeling the cold sweat that had beaded upon his brow. The manor seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy, as if the very walls were alive and aware of his torment. Thomas could feel the weight of the gloom pressing in upon him, the shadows seeming to close in, taunting him with the promise of Isabelle's spectral presence. He moved through the manor, his steps faltering, driven by an inexplicable compulsion to seek out the source of the whispers. The air grew colder with each step, the temperature dropped so pronounced that he could see his own breath misting in the air. The grand staircase, once the centerpiece of the foyer, now stood in disrepair, the ornate banister crumbling and the steps worn smooth by the passage of time. Thomas gripped the railing, his knuckles white, as he ascended, his gaze fixed upon the landing above. As he climbed, a faint, ethereal glow began to emanate from the shadows, a spectral radiance that seemed to beckon him onward. Thomas's breath caught in his throat, his heart pounding in his ears as he neared the top of the stairs. And there, shimmering and translucent, was the ghostly form of Isabelle, her eyes filled with a sorrow so profound that it threatened to shatter Thomas's very soul. She reached out a pale, spectral hand, her lips parting in a silent plea. "Thomas," she whispered, her voice barely audible, yet it reverberated through the manor, as if the very walls were echoing her lament. He stared, transfixed, unable to move, his mind reeling with a maelstrom of emotions. Disbelief, wonder, and a desperate, all-consuming longing warred within him, rendering him paralyzed, a mere spectator in the face of this supernatural visitation. Isabelle's ghostly form seemed to flicker and fade, as if the manor itself was struggling to maintain her presence. Thomas reached out, his fingers grasping at the air, a hoarse cry of anguish tearing from his throat. "Isabelle, don't leave me!" But the specter had vanished, leaving only the oppressive gloom and the haunting echo of her whispered plea. Thomas collapsed to his knees, his shoulders shaking with the force of his sobs, the weight of his grief threatening to consume him entirely. The manor, once a symbol of his wealth and influence, now felt like a prison, a tomb that housed the lingering remnants of his beloved spirit. He had been granted a fleeting glimpse of Isabelle, and yet she had slipped through his fingers, leaving him bereft and alone in the ever-encroaching darkness. As the storm raged on outside, Thomas Elliot wept, his tears mingling with the shadows that seemed to press in upon him, a testament to the unrelenting anguish that had taken root in his heart. The manor, once a bastion of grandeur, now stood as a monument to his shattered dreams, a haunting reminder of the life he had lost. The specter's lament had been heard, and Thomas knew, deep in his soul, that he would stop at nothing to commune with Isabelle's ghost once more, even if it meant descending into the very depths of madness itself. Chapter 3. The Lure of the Darkness. The storm raged on, the howling wind battering the crumbling walls of Elliot Manor as if the very heavens themselves wept for the tragedy that had befallen this once grand edifice. Within the decaying halls, Thomas Elliot paced restlessly, his footsteps echoing like the mournful tolling of a bell. Grief had etched deep lines upon his weathered face, his eyes hollow and haunted, the light that once danced within them extinguished. Thomas had loved his wife, Isabelle, with every fiber of his being, but now she was gone, her untimely demise burning like a brand upon his soul, a pain that refused to ebb. In the shadows of the manor's library, he sought solace, his trembling fingers tracing the spines of ancient tomes, their leather bindings cracked and worn with age. The flickering candlelight cast eerie shadows upon the walls, as if the very spirits of the dead were reaching out to him. Consumed by his desperation to commune with Isabelle's spirit, Thomas delved deeper into the arcane knowledge contained within these forgotten volumes. The pages whispered of rituals long abandoned, of dark pacts forged between the living and the dead. With each passing day, his obsession grew, the boundaries between the mortal realm and the spectral realm blurring until he could no longer discern where one ended and the other began. The manor itself seemed to mirror Thomas's mental and emotional deterioration. The once grand foyer, with its gleaming marble and gilded accents, now stood in disrepair, the floor lit by the fitful glow of candles that struggled to hold back the encroaching darkness. Cobwebs clung to the ornate chandeliers, and the air was thick with the scent of decay, as if the very essence of the manor was rotting from within. As Thomas delved deeper into the occult, strange occurrences began to plague the estate. Doors would creak open on their own, as if beckoning him to venture further into the unknown. The floorboards would groan underfoot, and the shadows seemed to shift and dance, taunting him with the promise of Isabelle's presence. The howling of the wind, like the wails of 1,000 lost souls, echoed through the corridors, filling Thomas with a sense of dread that he could not shake. In the dead of night, when the manor was shrouded in darkness, Thomas would catch glimpses of a spectral form, a faint luminescence that seemed to drift just beyond his reach. His heart would race, a mixture of fear and desperate longing, as he strained to make out the features of his beloved Isabelle. Was she truly there, or was his mind playing cruel tricks on him, tormented by the memory of her untimely demise? The library, once a sanctuary of knowledge and solace, now felt like a tomb, the air thick with the weight of the occult. Thomas pored over ancient tomes, his eyes bloodshot and his hands trembling, as he sought the answers that would bridge the divide between the living and the dead. The more he learned, the more the manor seemed to come alive with a malevolent energy, as if the very walls were sentient and aware of his unholy quest. As the days turned into weeks, Thomas's obsession deepened, consuming him entirely. He would spend hours in the chapel, kneeling before the crumbling altar, chanting arcane incantations and performing rituals that he barely understood. The flickering candlelight cast eerie shadows upon the walls, and the air was thick with the scent of incense and a faint tang of something darker, more sinister. The manor itself seemed to tremble with each passing day, as if it were a living, breathing entity, reacting to the supernatural forces that Thomas had unleashed. The shadows lengthened, and the very walls seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy, as if they were alive and aware of the darkness that had taken root within their foundations. Thomas, consumed by his obsession, became increasingly isolated, withdrawing from the world beyond the manor's crumbling walls. He could no longer bear the thought of leaving, for fear that Isabelle's ghostly presence would vanish, leaving him bereft and alone once more. The manor had become his entire world, a prison of his own making, where the line between the living and the dead had become irrevocably blurred. As the storm continued to rage, battering the manor's decaying structure, Thomas knew that he was nearing the end of his journey. The veil between the mortal realm and the spectral realm had grown thin, and the promise of Isabelle's eternal embrace was a siren's call that he could no longer resist. With each passing day, the lure of the darkness grew stronger, and Thomas found himself drawn ever deeper into the unknown, his soul poised on the precipice of a fate more terrifying than he could ever have imagined. Chapter 4. The Corrupting Influence. The storm raged on, the howling wind and lashing rain battering the crumbling facade of Elliot Manor as if the very heavens wept for the tragedy that had befallen the once grand estate. Within the decaying halls, Thomas Elliot paced restlessly, his footsteps echoing like the mournful tolling of a bell. Grief had etched deep lines upon his weathered face, his eyes hollow and haunted, the light that had once danced within them now extinguished. Thomas had retreated to the manor's library, seeking solace in the shadows cast by the flickering candlelight. Trembling fingers traced the spines of ancient tomes, their leather bindings cracked and worn, as if the very books shared in the building's decay. The air was thick with the musty scent of forgotten knowledge, a palpable weight that seemed to press in upon Thomas, suffocating him. Driven by his desperate need to commune with Isabelle's spirit, Thomas had delved deeper into the arcane wisdom contained within these forgotten volumes. The boundaries between the mortal realm and the spectral realm blurred, until he could no longer discern the line that separated the living from the dead. Shadows seemed to shift and sway, as if the very walls of the manor were alive with a malevolent energy. Thomas felt a chill creep down his spine, a sensation akin to being watched by unseen eyes. He whirled around, his heart pounding, but the library remained still, the only sound the gentle flicker of the candles. Shaking his head, Thomas turned his attention back to the tome before him, his brow furrowed in concentration. The pages were yellowed with age, the ink faded, yet the words seemed to leap off the page, calling to him like a siren's song. He traced the intricate symbols and runes, his breath catching in his throat as he deciphered their meaning. Rituals of necromancy, spells to commune with the dead. The knowledge contained within these pages was both alluring and terrifying. Thomas felt a dark temptation stirring within him, a seductive whisper that promised to reunite him with his beloved Isabelle. He shuddered, his hands trembling as he turned the pages, his eyes drinking in the arcane knowledge. The manor itself seemed to respond to Thomas's growing obsession, as if the very walls were alive with a corrupting influence. Cracks began to spread across the once sturdy stone, and the air grew thick with the scent of decay. The flickering candlelight cast eerie shadows upon the walls, shadows that seemed to shift and sway, as if the spirits of the dead were reaching out to him. Thomas found himself drawn deeper into the occult, his desperation to commune with Isabelle's ghost overriding his better judgment. He pored over the ancient texts, his mind consumed by visions of Isabelle's ethereal form, her spectral presence both alluring and unsettling. As the hours ticked by, Thomas's grip on reality began to slip. The manor's decay accelerated, mirroring the deterioration of his own mental state. Crumbling walls, flickering lights, and a pervasive sense of unease. All of it seemed to close in around him, as if the very fabric of the world was unraveling. Thomas's interactions with Isabelle's ghost became more frequent and more disturbing. She would appear to him in fleeting glimpses, her eyes filled with a profound sorrow that cut him to the core. And then, she would vanish, leaving him grasping at the air, his heart aching with a desperation that threatened to consume him. Sometimes, Thomas would catch a glimpse of her in the shadows, her ethereal form luminescent and unsettling. Other times, he would hear her voice, a whisper that caressed his ear, promising him eternal union if only he would surrender his soul. The line between reality and the spectral realm blurred, and Thomas found himself slipping deeper into the abyss. The manor itself seemed to mirror his mental and emotional deterioration. Doors would creak open of their own accord, and the air would grow thick with the scent of decay. Thomas would start at the slightest sound, his nerves frayed and his mind in turmoil. The very walls seemed to close in around him, as if the manor itself was alive and intent on devouring him. Thomas knew that he was teetering on the edge of madness, that the obsession that consumed him was slowly unraveling his sanity. And yet, he could not bring himself to turn away from the siren's call of the supernatural. Isabelle's ghost had ensnared him, her spectral presence a seductive lure that he found himself powerless to resist. The manor had become a prison, a labyrinth of shadows and decay that threatened to swallow him whole. And as Thomas delved deeper into the occult, the corrupting influence of the supernatural seemed to seep into every corner of his existence, until he could no longer discern where the manor ended and he began. Chapter 5, The Specter's Caress. The storm raged on, its savage howls echoing through the crumbling halls of Elliot Manor, as if the heavens themselves mourned the tragedy that had befallen this once grand estate. Within the decaying confines, Thomas Elliot paced the shadowed corridors, his footsteps muffled by the thick, oppressive air. Grief had etched deep lines upon his weathered face, his eyes hollow and haunted, the light that had once danced within them now extinguished. Thomas found himself drawn to the manor's library, surrounded by the musty tomes that lined the shelves. The flickering candlelight cast eerie shadows upon the walls, as if the very spirits of the dead were reaching out to him. His trembling fingers traced the spines of the ancient volumes, seeking solace in the arcane knowledge they contained. The boundaries between the mortal realm and the spectral realm had grown increasingly blurred, and Thomas could no longer discern the line between reality and the phantasms that plagued his waking hours. A sudden chill swept through the library, and Thomas felt a presence behind him. Whirling around, he found himself face to face with the ghostly form of his beloved Isabelle. Her eyes were filled with a profound sorrow that pierced his very soul, and her spectral features were bathed in an unearthly luminescence. Thomas reached out, his fingers trembling, as if to touch her, but his hand passed through the ethereal mist that surrounded her. "Isabelle," he whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. "How can this be?" The specter's lips parted, and a haunting melody spilled forth, a lament that seemed to echo through the very fabric of the manor. "Thomas, my love," she murmured, her voice barely audible above the howling of the wind. "I have returned to you, but our reunion is not as you had hoped." Thomas felt a chill run down his spine as Isabelle's words sank in. "What do you mean?" he asked, his heart pounding in his chest. "The veil between the living and the dead has grown thin," Isabelle replied, her ghostly form drifting closer. "I am bound to this place, tethered by the weight of my unfinished earthly desires." She reached out, her incorporeal fingers caressing Thomas's cheek, and he shuddered at the icy touch. "Then let me help you, my love," Thomas pleaded, his eyes brimming with desperate hope. "Tell me what I must do to free you from this torment." Isabelle's expression darkened, a shadow passing over her ethereal features. "There is a price to be paid, Thomas," she whispered, her voice laced with a haunting sorrow. "A price that may cost you your very soul." Thomas felt a shiver of dread run through him, but the depth of his love for Isabelle was too great to be swayed by such warnings. "I will pay any price," he declared, his voice resolute. "I cannot bear to be parted from you any longer." Isabelle's ghostly form seemed to flicker and pulse, as if responding to Thomas's unwavering determination. "Then so be it," she murmured, her voice tinged with a hint of foreboding. "Come to me, my love, and let us be reunited, even if it means crossing the threshold into the realm of the damned." Thomas felt a surge of elation, his heart racing as he reached out to Isabelle's spectral form. As his fingers brushed against the ethereal mist that surrounded her, a jolt of icy energy shot through him, and he gasped, his senses overwhelmed by the sheer intensity of the experience. The manor itself seemed to tremble with a malevolent energy, as if the very walls were alive and pulsing with a dark, primal force. Isabelle's ghostly form began to coalesce, her features becoming more defined and tangible. Thomas watched, transfixed, as she reached out and enveloped him in a chilling embrace, her icy touch sending shivers down his spine. The world around them seemed to fade, the boundaries between the living and the dead blurring until Thomas could no longer discern where he ended and Isabelle's spectral form began. In that moment, Thomas felt a profound sense of both ecstasy and dread, as if he were teetering on the precipice of a great and terrible abyss. The manor's shadows lengthened, and the air grew thick with the scent of decay, as if the very fabric of reality was being torn asunder. Thomas surrendered himself to Isabelle's ghostly caress, his soul yearning for the promised union, even as a small part of him recoiled in horror at the dark forces he had unleashed. The storm raged on, its savage howls echoing through the manor's decaying halls, as if the heavens themselves wept for the tragic fate that had befallen Thomas Elliot and the woman he loved. The specter's lament continued to reverberate, a haunting melody that seemed to seep into the very marrow of the crumbling estate, a harbinger of the dark secrets that were yet to be unveiled.
Thank you for joining us on another spine-chilling journey, where nightmares come to life and horror knows no bounds. If you enjoyed this tale of terror, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you're brave enough, step through the door and subscribe to Sinister Serials, where every day brings a new flavor of fear, from Macabre Mondays to Thriller Thursdays. And don't forget to check out our other terrifying tales, waiting to be discovered in our library of horror. Until next time, keep the lights on, if you dare.
In the shadows of the manor, where the echoes speak of pain, wanders a soul, heart torn asunder, calling out in vain. The storm outside mirrors the turmoil within his heart, it rains. Every drop of rain, a whisper of her name in the night. A silent scream of the unseen, her absence a void, unfilled, unclaimed. Isabelle, my lost love, in the night I hear your call. A spectral dance, a fleeting glance, in the darkness I fall. Your touch, a ghostly whisper in the silence of the crumbling walls, hold secrets of a love that once did bloom. In the heart of the storm he seeks her, amidst the gloom. Her laughter, a distant memory that lights up the room. But shadows cast a deep and endless tomb. Whispers of the past echo in each room. Ghosts of what was lost loom. Isabelle, my lost love, in the night I hear your call. A spectral dance, a fleeting glance, in the darkness I fall. Your touch, a ghostly whisper in the silence of the hall. In the eye of the storm, where the past and present blend, he reaches for her, a love that transcends. But the specter's caress, a fate he cannot mend. His broken heart contends. Her spectral hands extend, a plea to amend. Halls of Elliot Manor, where the storm rages on, lies a tale of a love. But in the whispers of the wind, her spirit sings her song. Isabelle, my lost love, in the night I hear your call. A spectral dance, a fleeting glance, in the darkness I fall. Your touch, a ghostly whisper, in the silence of the hall.